Good morning. Thank you all for coming. I'm Denver Police Chief Ron Thomas, here to provide a follow-up briefing on a critical incident, officer-involved shooting that occurred last Monday, January 27th, at 35th and Colorado Boulevard. Before I turn it over to Commander Clark to provide a more detailed description of what our investigation has uncovered as it relates to this particular incident, I just want to acknowledge how impactful this has been, both for the Denver community, the Denver Police Department, not to mention how impactful this has been for the lives of those two individuals, or the families of those two individuals who lost their lives as a result of this senseless act of violence. And so, Commander Clark.
Good morning. Thank you for being here and giving us an opportunity to provide an update on the police officer-involved shooting that occurred on Monday, January 27th, 2025. This is intended to be a follow-up briefing, and it's based upon information that we've gathered after interviewing available witnesses, speaking with the involved officer, and analyzing evidence that was collected at the scene. There may be information that I do not know or cannot discuss, and we do have a individual who's been charged with a crime in this case, so that may limit our ability to answer some questions, but to the degree we are able, we'll address any questions. On Monday, January 27, 2025, just after midnight, a uniformed Denver police officer was driving a marked police vehicle in the area of 35th Avenue and Colorado Boulevard. While driving southbound, the officer heard gunshots from the parking lot of the 7-Eleven located at 3990 East 35th Avenue. The officer recognized that a shooting had occurred in the parking lot. He stopped on Colorado Boulevard, exited his vehicle, and approached the scene, where he observed a male down in the parking lot between the gas pumps and the convenience store. As the officer went toward the victim, a male suspect who was standing near a vehicle parked at the gas pumps suddenly began firing rounds at the officer. The officer immediately returned fire, and an exchange of gunfire ensued. The suspect then fled southbound through the alley between Colorado and Harrison Street. The officer pursued the suspect on foot, but lost sight of the individual in the area of the 3300 block of Harrison Street. Believing the suspect was hiding in a fenced yard, a perimeter was established, and the tactical resources from the department's Metro SWAT team responded to coordinate a search of the area. At approximately 3:45 that same morning, SWAT officers located the subject hiding in a shed in the backyard of a residence in the 3300 block of Jackson Street. A Metro K-9 was deployed, and the suspect was bitten during the arrest. He was immediately transferred to a waiting ambulance for evaluation for the dog bite, as well as for prolonged exposure to the extreme cold while he was hiding to avoid apprehension. It was determined that the subject was not struck or injured by the rounds that were fired by the officer. The involved officer confirmed the subject who was taken into custody was the same individual who fired the rounds at him. While efforts to locate the subject were ongoing, other officers responded and attended to the victims at the 7-Eleven location. An adult male was found suffering from gunshot wounds in the parking lot. He was pronounced deceased at the scene. A second adult male was found inside the store, suffering from gunshot wounds. He was transported to the hospital by ambulance and later died from his injuries. A third male sustained injuries from a physical altercation that occurred before the shooting. He was medically evaluated and later transported to police headquarters for an interview. Through the investigation, detectives determined that prior to the police shooting, an argument broke out between two groups in the parking lot of the 7-Eleven store. During the altercation, two individuals began assaulting a third person. While the victim was on the ground, another man who was associated with the victim on the ground pulled out a handgun and fired multiple rounds, striking the two individuals involved in the assault. After the shooting, the subject returned to the vehicle that was parked near the gas pumps, and this is when the officer arrived and attempted to intervene, which led to the shooting incident. Surveillance video from the store, as well as the body camera from the involved officer, shows the offender firing multiple rounds at the officer and the officer returning gunfire. It was determined that the Denver police officer fired 14 rounds from a duty handgun. During the search, investigators recovered a black 9mm semi-automatic handgun that appears to be a privately manufactured firearm, commonly referred to as a ghost gun, in the alley along the flight path of the offender. The gun was loaded with 12 rounds of 9mm ammunition, and the magazine in the firearm was capable of holding 30 rounds of ammunition. The suspect has been identified as 19-year-old Fabian Vasquez. He was taken to the hospital and later booked into the Denver Detention Center, where he remains in custody. The Denver District Attorney's Office has formally charged Mr. Vasquez with attempted first-degree murder after deliberation, first-degree assault of a police officer, possession of a weapon by a previous offender, and prohibited use of a high-capacity magazine. The District Attorney's Office continues to evaluate charges for Mr. Vasquez related to the shooting that resulted in the death of the two individuals. Another person, 18-year-old Dominic Gallegos, was arrested and charged with possession of a weapon by a previous offender. The officer involved in this incident is a uniformed officer assigned to District 2. He's been with the police department since 2023 when he started as a lateral officer with our agency. That officer has no prior involvement in a police shooting incident. His body-worn camera was activated, and the camera captured the interaction with the subject as well as the exchange of gunfire. Per our policy, the officer will be placed in a non-line assignment while he goes through the department's reintegration process. As with all our critical incidents, this is being investigated by the Colorado Bureau of Investigations, the Colorado State Patrol, the Denver Police Department's Homicide Unit, and the DA's office. It's being overseen by the Office of the Independent Monitor. The investigation is ongoing. Anyone with information or additional information is encouraged to contact the police department or Metro Denver Crime Stoppers. I'll briefly go through some slides to provide context and then answer any questions. This is a snapshot from the officer's body camera. This is as he is approaching from Colorado Boulevard coming into the parking lot, and what the officer sees is an individual on the far left is down on the ground. That individual is ultimately later pronounced deceased at the scene. There's a male in front of the vehicle on the west side of the gas pumps who's down on the ground. He's moving around that the officer can see. That individual was the subject who was assaulted prior or during the assault that occurred prior to the officer's arrival. The red notes the location of the shooting offender. This is a snapshot. The officer has moved laterally to the north through the parking lot, and he's being fired upon. What you see for the offender popping his head above the rear passenger side there is a still image, the frame of a muzzle flash. The offender continues to move his position, and so too does the officer, and that's another position where there's gunfire. The offender then takes a position west into that alley and travels southbound on foot from there. Officers recovered this firearm in the alley. Again, it was loaded with 12 rounds of 9mm ammunition, and that extended magazine, high-capacity magazine, can hold 30 rounds. I can answer any questions. Sir?
Just to clarify, so there were 12 rounds in the gun. You think he fired the other, by my math, 18 rounds, or do you know?
We have evidence that we believe 15 rounds were fired from that gun at the scene. And I don't know, I can't definitively say how many were fired at the officer versus how many were fired at the two individuals prior to the officer's arrival. But we believe 15 rounds were fired from that firearm.
Okay. So, you believe that's the weapon used to kill the two individuals?
We do.
Prior to this incident, did these people know each other, or what sparked this fight?
We do not believe they knew each other. It was an encounter where they came together for different purposes, getting drinks or gas at the gas station, and then there was a conflict that started there between those two groups.
What was the conflict about?
So we're not exactly sure what the specific concern was. There was a conversation. It sounds like there was an exchange of a vape pen at one point, and then there was that vape pen wasn't going to be returned, and then it escalated from there as well.
That seems more frightening to people to think that just a random trip to the 7-Eleven got two people killed. What would you want to say to the community?
Well, this was two groups. I'm not exactly certain. There could be more underlying this incident that led to it, but there's nothing specific that we're aware of.
Any gang affiliation you're aware about, anybody involved?
None of them were documented. There is a chance that they were involved or affiliated with a game, but we don't have specific documentation to that end.
broader question I have is, body camera footage has obviously sort of changed what the public finds out about a lot of incidents involving officers, but it's also changed the way you're able to investigate these things. Can you talk a little bit about prior to body cam, how you try to figure something out like this versus now being able to actually watch video of it almost immediately?
It definitely helps from the investigative side, understanding what is important in the investigation, the scope of what needs to be secured and collected. It gives somewhat of a first-person view, so we can get ground level and see what may have been going on, even if it's not perceived by the officer at the time. So it definitely helps provide a clearer picture of what's going on. It captures oftentimes things that are said, commands, things that are going around the officer that, again, they may not perceive in the moment because of their focused attention on the threat that they're addressing. And so to that end, it answers a lot of questions and helps provide context, especially in scenarios where witnesses and officers don't have specific recollections of sequences of events.
And then maybe a question that Chief could address I have is as you're well aware, state law requires release of body cam in some cases, but not in all cases. Some departments don't proactively release it. It's sometimes a fight to try to get it released. Tell me your thought process on, I mean, we're 8 days out from this incident, I think, on releasing, making this public now versus waiting for the process to play all the way out and that sort of thing.
You know, I think, and I think I've demonstrated throughout my tenure as chief of police that transparency is very important, and so I think that this is certainly something of significant community concern, and so I believe that it's important to be transparent about that and let the community see what there is involved in this incident.
Jumping off of that, this video is pretty intense. When I watched that, I was just curious, how often does something like this happen, even if there's not a fatality where a cop is like chasing someone down an alley? How often does this go on?
Fortunately, extremely rare. You know, obviously, you know, community safety and officer safety is paramount to me. And, you know, unfortunately, there are 2 individuals that did not go home after this incident, and really just by the grace of God that our officer did go home. And I think, thankfully, even though I think we have armed encounters on a very regular basis, unfortunately, there are so many guns in our community that our officers have occasion to come across individuals that are armed with weapons. But more often than not, we were able to recover those weapons without any kind of a violent altercation.
Can you describe what is going on now and where this goes moving forward with the officer and this investigation?
Yeah, so again, we're still evaluating and working with the district attorneys to determine if their criminal charges are warranted against Mr. Vasquez in relation to the shooting of the 2 and the deaths of the 2 individuals there. Evaluating
Is that because it could be self-defense?
Exactly, evaluating self-defense claims to determine if those apply in this scenario. So he is being held relative to the conduct involving the officer, but we're still working on the other, on the deaths of the 2 individuals and determining if homicide charges are appropriate related to that. The investigation, so the case will go over to that entity. The officer will process through our reintegration process and go through that, and then transition back into a patrol assignment when he and the department are ready at that point, and then it'll be reviewed internally.
Can one of you talk a little bit about that transition process, what all involved there?
Yeah, I'm sure all of you can imagine being shot at and then having to fire your weapon at someone can be a very traumatic experience. And so I think that there is a need to address that trauma that results from an incident like that. And so we really have a very thoughtful tactical pause for that officer, pulling them offline, making sure that they're connected to mental health resources and other resources to help them process the trauma that they've been through. They are constantly evaluated through that process, and then when it is determined by that officer and by our resources and our department, we put them back slowly into their line assignment.
Is there a typical time period?
Roughly 12 to 16 weeks.
Is there anything you can talk about with the victims' families? Are they from around here?
All of the individuals involved are local to the metro area.
Were investigators able to retrieve any other video evidence, like surveillance from the 7-Eleven?
Yes, sir. There is surveillance video from the 7-Eleven outside the store, and some of the inside cameras captured the initial fight, physical altercation that occurred as well.
The shooting of the two individuals actually happened in the parking lot, and one went back into the store.
That's correct. The shooting occurs outside, and he goes immediately back into the store.
And just to clarify, you don't think there's another suspect at large at this point?
So we're still looking at the possibility that there was others. We do know that a vehicle left, but we're not certain of their involvement, and we believe that the primary shooter in this was involved in this incident would have been Mr. Vasquez.
So obviously he got there by a vehicle.
Yes, sir. He was
That vehicle took off.
the one, Mr. Vasquez.
Yeah.
No, he was in the vehicle that white vehicle that you see at the pumps. He was associated with that vehicle.